where some people who are here, whom I see come from, had already made a deal with India that we sell our iron ore to them as iron ore. I said over my dead body, I have banned all the export of unprocessed minerals from here.
Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni just dropped a bombshell that has the West in shock. His words were clear, bold, and uncompromising. As long as I'm alive, Uganda will no longer export raw materials and minerals to the West. This isn't just a statement. It's a declaration of economic war against a system that has kept Africa dependent for decades. And it couldn't have come at a more critical time. Right now, the West, especially the United States, is scrambling to secure Africa's resources like never before. Cobalt, gold, lithium, rare earth minerals, these are the building blocks of the future economy. And Africa has them in abundance. For over a century, Africa has been the world's supplier of raw materials, while the real wealth, processing, refining, and manufacturing, happened thousands of miles away. The result? The West built empires. Africa stayed poor. But Museveni is saying, enough is enough. What pushed him to take this radical step? What does it mean for Uganda, for Africa, and for the global order? A few weeks ago, President Museveni made an announcement that could change Uganda's economic future forever. He declared a complete ban on the export of unprocessed raw materials, a bold move that sent shockwaves through international markets. According to a statement from State House on X, this directive is not just policy, it's a revolution in the making. Why does this matter? Because Uganda's economy, like many African economies, has been built on exporting raw produce to foreign markets. Bananas, beans, maize, rice, cassava, tea, coffee, fruits, vegetables, even livestock products like meat and dairy, plus fish from its vast lakes, are shipped out in their raw state every day. And yes, these exports bring in revenue. Farmers make money, the government earns foreign exchange. But here's the brutal truth. This system has kept Africa poor. Ugandan farmers sell raw materials for peanuts, while Western nations take those same resources, process them, and sell them back at 10 times the price. Take coffee, for example. Uganda is one of the top coffee producers in the world, but most of that coffee leaves the country unprocessed. The roasting, packaging, branding, all of that happens in Europe and America, and that's where the real money is made. Uganda gets the crumbs. The West takes the cake. And now Museveni is saying, no more. But here's the big question. Can Uganda really pull this off? What does this mean for farmers, for the economy, and for Western corporations who have profited from this system for decades? Uganda holds a crown that should be worth billions. It's the leading coffee producer in Africa and among the top in the world. But here's the painful truth. This crown is made of crumbs. Ugandan farmers export their raw coffee beans for just $2.50 per kilo. That price isn't set by Uganda. It's dictated by the global commodity market, a system designed to keep producers poor and processors rich. Now watch what happens next. Those same beans leave Uganda, travel thousands of miles to Europe or America, and go through roasting, grinding, and packaging. Suddenly, that $2.50 bag becomes instant coffee sold for $40 per kilo or more. The result? The global coffee industry rakes in over $460 billion every year. But all the coffee-growing nations combined, they take home just $25 billion, not even a quarter of the industry's profits. And here's the real kicker. Africa's share is only $2.5 billion. Meanwhile, Germany, a country that doesn't grow a single coffee bean, makes $6.8 billion annually from processing African coffee. How insane is that? And coffee is just one example. Take Uganda's high-grade iron ore. When sold raw, it fetches $47 per ton. But process that ore into steel, the same ton skyrockets to $900. That's an increase of over 1,800%. What does this tell you? The real wealth isn't in digging, it's in transforming. The money, the jobs, the growth, it all lies in value addition. Yet Africa remains trapped in the same old cycle. Export raw, import refined. This is why President Museveni's words hit like a thunderclap. No more economic hemorrhage. For decades, Africa's economy has bled, slowly, silently, through raw material exports. And who benefits? The West? Always the West. But Museveni is drawing the line. No more. The big question now is, can Uganda and Africa break this cycle of dependency? Or will foreign powers fight back to keep Africa chained to the bottom of the value chain? It's never written in any official document, but make no mistake, the West has always had a plan for Africa, a silent blueprint that has shaped global economics for decades. The plan? Africa remains the raw material supplier for the world. Don't take my word for it. Even Western leaders have admitted it. A former French president once said, "No one is interested in Africa developing too much." Let that sink in. Why would the world's richest nations fear Africa's development? The answer is simple. If Africa ever industrialized like the West, if it built factories, refineries, and technology hubs, the entire global balance would collapse. Think about South Korea. Just a few decades ago, South Korea was as poor as Mozambique. Today, it's a tech and manufacturing powerhouse. Now imagine if Mozambique or Nigeria or Uganda followed the same path. Imagine Africa producing cars, refining oil, processing its own cocoa and coffee. What would happen? Two things. First, Africa would stop buying finished goods from the West. No more overpriced imports. Second, Africa would become a competitor, one with unmatched natural resources. Here's the irony. The West doesn't even have these resources. To create its industries, the West depends on Africa. It takes Africa's raw materials, cobalt, gold, oil, coffee, at rock-bottom prices, ships them to Europe or America, turns them into finished products, and then sells them back to Africa for 10 times the cost. It's not trade, it's a cycle of dependency, a system designed to keep Africa on its knees while the West grows fat. And now, President Museveni is saying, no more. But here's the big question. What happens when Africa starts breaking free from this design? Will the West let go quietly or fight back with everything it has? The answer will shape the future of the continent and maybe the world. Now picture this, an Africa that's fully industrialized, a continent that no longer begs for technology but creates it. Factories across Nigeria assembling cars, Uganda building its own smartphones, Ghana exporting high-end computers, Kenya manufacturing world-class agricultural machinery. If that happens, Africa will no longer depend on the West for finished goods. That era of dependency will be over. And here's the game changer. Africa already owns the raw materials. Unlike Europe or America, Africa wouldn't need to import a single ounce of cobalt, a drop of oil, or a gram of gold. Meanwhile, the West? They'd still need Africa's resources. That's the reality no one talks about. And the economic shift wouldn't stop there. Today, Africa's role as the world's raw material supplier means one thing. Africa doesn't set the price. Its economies dance to the tune of foreign markets. Commodity prices are decided in London, New York, or Shanghai, not in Kampala. That's why African raw materials are dirt cheap compared to other regions. And every time there's a global shock, wars, recessions, policy changes, it's African economies that bleed the most. But imagine flipping that script. Imagine an Africa that processes its own oil into fuel, its own bauxite into aluminum, its own cocoa into premium chocolate. Suddenly, Africa isn't selling for pennies, it's selling for power. And that's what terrifies the global system. Because when Africa moves up the value chain, the West loses control. The question is, who will let that happen without a fight? But here's the ultimate game changer. If Africa industrializes, it controls the price. No longer will African gold, oil, or cobalt be sold for pennies. No longer will London or New York dictate the value of African wealth. Instead, the tables turn, and the West, for the first time in history, becomes dependent on Africa's terms. And that is exactly what terrifies the global powers. Because a wealthy, industrialized Africa would shatter the entire economic hierarchy that has existed for centuries. This is why, long before independence, the West built a system designed to keep Africa in chains. Not physical chains, but economic ones. A system that transitioned seamlessly from colonial rule into neo-colonial control. They called it freedom, but it was an illusion. A blueprint that ensured Africa would remain the raw material warehouse for the developed world. And whenever a leader dared to break free, they were eliminated, assassinated, overthrown in coups. Sometimes by foreign agents, sometimes by traitors within our own borders, bought and paid for by the same powers that claim to promote democracy. This is the cycle, a cycle so deadly that today many African leaders have simply given up. They've seen what happens to those who fight back. So, they choose to maintain the status quo and call it stability. But here's the real question. Will this system last forever, or is Africa finally ready to burn it down? Every time a new mineral is discovered in Africa, a familiar ritual begins. Foreign investors, mostly from the West, sometimes from China, arrive in droves. They come dressed in sharp suits, wearing confident smiles, walking into African presidential palaces like kings. They sit across from African leaders and lay out their pitch. We'll finance the project. We'll bring in the technology. We'll create jobs. We'll attract more investors. Together, we'll build your economy. It sounds like a dream, but here's the reality. These deals are anything but partnerships. For the foreigners, it's a gold mine. For Africa, it's crumbs. The country gets a token royalty while the company walks away with millions, sometimes billions, in profits. And yet these deals keep happening. Why? Because on paper, they look good. Annual reports boast that mining contributes to the economy. Government officials point to figures in glossy documents. But step outside those reports into the real world, and the truth hits hard. The communities near these mines remain poor, polluted, and broken. The royalties, barely enough to fix a road, let alone build an economy. The promised jobs, seasonal, low-paying, and unsafe. And the profits, gone before the ink dries. Wired to foreign banks, a system so polished that it convinces African nations they're winning when, in reality, they're being stripped bare. The question is, how long will Africa keep falling for the same story? These so-called mineral deals are nothing short of a scam. For decades, African nations have signed agreements with foreign companies under the illusion of progress. The promise? We'll build factories, we'll set up refineries, we'll process your raw materials into finished goods right here on your soil. We'll create jobs and train your people to master the technology. It sounds perfect. It sounds like hope. But here's the truth. It never happens. Just last week, Guinea delivered a wake-up call to the world. The government revoked the license of a major Dubai-based aluminum company, one that had been happily mining bauxite, the key ingredient for aluminum production. Under its agreement with Guinea, this company was required to build an aluminum refinery inside the country. It agreed. It signed. It promised. And then, excuses. Postponement after postponement. The refinery never broke ground, but the mining never stopped. Day after day, trainloads of Guinea's bauxite were shipped out to Dubai, where the real profits were made. After years of waiting, Guinea finally said enough is enough and kicked the company out. But here's the bigger question. How many times has this happened? How many companies have promised development only to rob Africa blind? The answer is chilling. Thousands of deals, thousands of promises, and not a single one has delivered what Africa truly needs: value addition, jobs, and industrial power. Why? Why did these foreign companies refuse to build on African soil? Why did they resist giving Africa the one thing that could end centuries of dependency, technology, and control? Because the truth is simple. A self-sufficient Africa is the greatest threat to their global dominance, and they will do anything to stop that from happening. As that French professor once said, no one is interested in allowing Africa to develop too much. Those words aren't just a warning. They're a blueprint for everything we've seen happen on this continent for decades. But here's the painful truth. The biggest obstacle to breaking free isn't just the West. It's our own leaders. Take a closer look at the political landscape in Africa today. What do you see? The same faces, the same names, the same tired ideas. In country after country, the majority of our leaders are old men, many of whom have been in power since the days right after independence. Their ideologies, frozen in time, their loyalty, not to the people, but to the very system set up by the colonial masters. Even President Museveni of Uganda, who recently made headlines for banning raw material exports, is one of the longest ruling leaders in Africa. Over 3 decades in power, and yet, in his own words, he admitted something that should shake us all. Let them stay in the ground. When the grandchildren come, they will get them out. Think about that. This is not a statement of triumph. It's a confession of defeat. It's an acknowledgement that the current generation of African leaders lacks the will or the courage to dismantle the neo-colonial chains. They're too entrenched, too compromised, and too invested in systems designed to keep Africa weak. Museveni knows he can't change it, so he's passing the fight to the future, to our children, to our grandchildren. But here's the question that should keep every African awake at night. Why should they have to fight the battles we could start today? The question is simple. If China could transform itself into the factory of the world, why can't Africa? Think about it. Africa has the population. Africa has the resources. Africa has the advantage of low production costs. By all logic, Africa should already be a global manufacturing hub. But instead of attracting billion-dollar factories, African leaders are still busy chasing cheap mineral deals. This has to change, now. Instead of exporting raw minerals for pennies, Africa should be negotiating to bring factories in. Imagine those factories in Accra, Nairobi, producing not just for Africa, but for the entire world. But here's the challenge. For global companies to build these factories, Africa must position itself as a serious alternative to China and Southeast Asia in the global supply chain. Right now, the continent has major advantages: low labor costs, abundant natural resources, a massive internal market under the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. So what's stopping Africa? Why are global investors still hesitant? The answer is clear: poor infrastructure, inconsistent policies, and weak industrial capacity. These are the bottlenecks, and unless Africa fixes them, this once-in-a-century opportunity will slip away. Here's the good news. Africa has the numbers to win. By 2050, Africa's working-age population will surpass 1 billion people, bigger than India, bigger than China. This is a goldmine for labor-intensive manufacturing, but there's a catch. Numbers alone don't create jobs. Skills do. Without serious investment in technical education, vocational training, and industrial infrastructure, this demographic advantage will become a demographic disaster. This is Africa's moment. If the leaders act now, build roads, fix power, set up industrial parks, and enforce investor-friendly but fair policies, Africa could replace China as the world's factory floor. But the question remains, will our leaders rise to the challenge, or will history repeat itself? Here's a fact most people overlook. Africa holds the keys to the future of clean energy. This is the continent where cobalt, lithium, and rare earth metals lie buried. The very minerals that power electric vehicles, smartphones, and renewable energy grids. Without Africa's resources, the EV revolution stops. The global clean energy transition collapses. And here's what's even more shocking. While Africa owns these minerals, it earns next to nothing from them. Why? Because the continent is still trapped in a raw material export model, digging out cobalt, lithium, and bauxite, then shipping them to the West or China for processing. The wealth stays abroad, the poverty stays here. Now look at what's happening globally. The United States and Europe are desperate to break free from China's monopoly on these critical minerals. They're looking for new supply chains. They're knocking on Africa's door, and this is Africa's chance to rewrite the rules. Trump's trade policies have made this even more interesting. His tariffs on Chinese and European goods have created a window of opportunity for Africa. Why? Because American companies need alternatives, and fast. Africa already enjoys preferential, duty-free access to the US under the African Growth and Opportunity Act. If African leaders play this smart, they can turn this opening into a manufacturing boom. They can attract billions in investment for light manufacturing, agribusiness, battery production, and clean energy industries. Instead of exporting raw cobalt, why not export electric batteries? Instead of raw lithium, why not export EV components? This is Africa's moment to move up the value chain. But here's the big question. Will our leaders seize this opportunity, or will they let history repeat itself? But here's the brutal truth. If Africa doesn't act now, it could lose everything. While the US and EU push protectionist trade policies, global supply chains are being redrawn. If African nations stay stuck in the old model, digging raw minerals and shipping them out, the continent will miss a once-in-a-generation opportunity. Instead of being a global manufacturing hub, Africa will remain a raw material pit while Southeast Asia and Latin America capture the real wealth, the high-value production that creates jobs, builds industries, and transforms economies. This is the moment. Africa can either rise to become a global industrial power or watch the world move forward without it. The choice is in Africa's hands. What do you think? Should Africa keep depending on foreign firms or take bold steps to build its own industries? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this video insightful, don't forget to hit that like button, share it, and subscribe for more eye-opening stories about Africa's future.